Part 4 begins with the Allies on the march. The war conferences. The question was when a second front would be opened against Germany. The Soviets were being hammered by the Germans. At the Casablanca conference, FDR and Churchill would meet and decided that Hitler was the number one enemy. Stalin's Soviet Union needed desperate help, and after the defeat of Germany, the U.S. would look to the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union to help defeat Japan. It was decided at the Casablanca Conference that the Allies would only accept unconditional surrender of Germany, Italy, and Japan, which is still debated by historians today. At the Tehran Conference, Stalin met with the British and the American leaders who promised to invade France within 6 months. It was the first time that all three met. Meetings of the Allied leaders at Casablanca and Tehran revealed that the Allies possessed differing views of the world after the war. Stalin wanted more territory. FDR believed Britain should free its colonies. The Pacific, the battle for Guadalcanal. Having halted Japan's advance at Midway, Allies on the offensive drove the Japanese back to their own islands. On October 25th through 26, 1942, the Battle of Savo Island, north of Guadalcanal, was a major Japanese offensive, temporarily deprived Allies on Guadalcanal of air and naval support. John Basilone, on October 24, 1942, the man you see in picture in the right-hand corner, Japanese forces began a frontal attack using machine guns, grenades, and heavy mortars against the American heavy machine guns. Basilone commanded 2 sections of machine guns that fought for the next 2 days until only Basilone and 2 other Marines continued fighting. Basilone moved an extra gun into position and maintained continuing fire against the incoming Japanese forces. He then repaired and manned another machine gun, holding the defensive line until replacements arrived. As battles raged, ammunition became critically low, and with supply lines cut off, Basilone fought through hostile ground to resupply his gunners, which urgently needed ammunition. Toward the dawn of the battle, Basilone fought Japanese soldiers using only a .45 caliber pistol and a machete. By the end of the engagement, the Japanese regiment was virtually annihilated. For his actions during the battle, he received the United States' highest award for bravery, the Medal of Honor. The Sullivan Brothers, pictured below, were 5 siblings who were killed in action shortly after the sinking of their light cruiser, the USS Genoa, the vessel on which they had all served. On November 13, 1942, Joseph, Francis, Albert, Madison, and George Sullivan. Their sacrifice would lead to the War Department adopting a policy of siblings not serving on the same vessel or on the same unit in the ground or in the air. It is their sacrifice that would inspire Spielberg to do his movie Saving Private Ryan. On November 12th through the 15th, Admiral Halsey destroyed Japan's fleet of 28 ships and transports, and the Battle of Cape Esperance prevented Japan from keeping the Solomons. The naval battle of Guadalcanal kept Japan from reinforcing the island, and they lost it. By February 9th, 1943, the final Japanese forces were withdrawn from the island, bringing the first land victory by U.S. Marines at Guadalcanal. Island hopping. Unlike the European theater war, racial hatred in the Pacific was intense on both sides. Japanese would not respect the rights of prisoners, and Americans rarely captured Japanese. If they did, they would simply display no quarter due to the brutal treatment towards their own soldiers and Marines. Targeting islands, U.S. forces planned to recapture the Central Islands, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, and the Carolines, the Marianas, and the Bosnians, in order to prevent the Japanese from using these islands as bases for strikes against MacArthur and Nimitz. Once rid of Japanese troops, and Allied forces would then push into the Philippines and to the coast of China and eventually hit the Japanese mainland. Island hopping. MacArthur and Nimitz devised a plan in defeating the Japanese in the Pacific. American forces will bypass Japanese strongholds in the Pacific and hop to the next island. The island hopping campaign began in late 1943 and involved American invasion of strategic Japanese-held islands such as Tarawa and Saipan. Back to Europe and the Mediterranean. North Africa. The British Army captured Tobruk on November 12, 1942. During the El Alamein campaign, of Rommel's 100,000 men army was killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. He also lost over 450 tanks and 1,000 guns. The British and Commonwealth forces suffered 13,500 casualties, and 500 of their tanks were damaged. However, of these, 350 were repaired, were able to take part in future battles. In Tunisia, the Tunisian campaign finally ended on May 10, 1943. Over 250,000 German and Italian troops were taken prisoners of war, including most of the Africa Corps. The North Africa theater casualties, U.S. casualties totaled about 18,500, while Axis casualties over a 2-year fighting period totaled nearly 500,000, including Canadian French forces of 2,500 ships. The next target was Sicily. Patton's plan called for the landing in Palermo, north of the island, and heading east to Messina, while Montgomery's 8th Army would strike in the southeastern portion of Sicily and work north to Messina, creating the same pincher movement as in Tunisia. Montgomery's plan called for Patton to protect Monty's left flank and both head to Messina. Eisenhower endorsed Monty's plan. During the invasion, Patton would eventually break off and race to Palermo, while Montgomery pushed towards Messina. Palermo would fall, and then Patton would use a series of amphibious landings to take Messina, and Patton would arrive in Messina first. On August 17th, Sicily fell to the Allies, with U.S. casualties at 7,400, Allied losses at 25,000 total. German and Italian losses at 167,000. However, it should be noticed, if Eisenhower had endorsed Patton's plan, they would have captured the entire lot before they could escape to Italy. Italy. On July 25th, Mussolini abdicated to King Victor Emmanuel, and Prime Minister Bajagdo sought to end the war. After the fall of Mussolini, bitter fighting for the control of Italy took place between the Allies and Germany. Hitler was determined not to give it up. The Allied invasion of Italy was the Allied landing on the mainland on September 3, 1943, by General Harold Alexander's 15th Army Corps, comprising Lieutenant General Mark Clark's U.S. 5th Army and General Bernard Montgomery's British 8th Army. Patton, unfortunately, was in Eisenhower's doghouse, as he was guilty of slapping 2 soldiers with PTSDs in Sicily. It was soon discovered that afterward that the German High Command was very interested where Patton was stationed, and would not believe the U.S. would fire and send home their best field general. The operation followed the successful invasion of Sicily during the Italian campaign, and the main invasion force landed around Salerno on the western part in Operation Avalanche, while 2 supporting operations took place at Calabria, Operation Baytown, and Taranto, Operation Slapstick, on September 8th. Italy was led by the new prime minister and accepted an unconditional surrender on October 13th. After Mussolini escaped to northern Italy, Italy declared war on Germany. Invasion on all fronts, 1944. To keep the Allies from landing in the northern part of Europe, Hitler authorized the creating of the Atlantic Wall of Fortress Europe. And as we see in this sideway cutaway, we'll see the problem that the Allies would have to face in landing in Europe. They would have to go to low tide, because if at high tide, their craft would be hit by belching tanks, tiller mines, ramps, and hedgehogs. So they had to come at low tide, and then had to work their way up the beaches, where then they would encounter barbed wire and minefields, also under constant fire from concrete-enforced pillboxes and concrete bunkers with heavy guns. The invasion of Europe. General Eisenhower was made Supreme Commander of Allied Forces at the insistence of Churchill. Operation Overlord was the code name for the invasion of France, also known as D-Day. On January 16, 1944, after Ike assumed his post as European Allied Supreme Commander, A third major offensive was planned into France across the English Channel, the coast of Normandy. Operation Fortitude was a code name for the military deception employed by the Allied nations as part of the overall deception strategy during the build-up to the 1944 Normandy invasion. Fortitude's aim of misleading the German high command as the location of the imminent invasion. A fictional army was built around General Patton, who the Germans were convinced would lead the invasion at Pas-de-Calais. A great number of fake tanks, artillery trucks, and planes were placed in the southeastern portion of England. The operation was intended to divert Axis attention away from Normandy when the invasion would occur on June 6, 1944, and delay reinforcement by convincing the Germans that the landings was purely a diversionary attack. The operation was one of the most successful military deceptions employed during the war, and arguably the most important. A crossword puzzle was discovered 5 weeks prior to the invasion, and words that appeared in the crossword puzzle were code words that appeared in the London Telegraph: Mulberry, Neptune, Omaha, Utah, and Overland. But it was found out that the crossword was created by a high school physics teacher, and it ended up being just a mere coincidence. D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944. The invasion begins with an airborne assault of the United States 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions and the British 6th Airborne Divisions, which was parachutes and gliders. Their mission was to take the coastal cities for link-up with a seaborne invasion. However, they were scattered all over the drop zones and didn't make it, and were sometimes mixed in with the various different units. This invasion was the largest amphibious operation in world history, involving 4,000 ships, 600 warships, 10,000 airplanes, and 176,000 troops. The Americans would land on Utah, where Rangers first had to scale a cliff to knock out the heavy guns. They accomplished their mission and discovered the guns were never put into place. Omaha would be the bloodiest fight of the entire invasion of all beachheads, where the U.S. lost over 2,000 killed on the first day. The British encountered lighter resistance on Gold and Juno beaches, and the Canadians landed on Sword Beach. But Hitler believed Normandy was a diversion and refused to send his elite SS Panzer tank divisions to attack for 2 weeks. Breakout, Operation Cobra. Fierce fighting in the hedgerows of Normandy made it very difficult. American General Omar Bradley came up with a plan for the American 8th Army Air Corps to blast the hedgerows and send in the armored divisions. The Allies broke through the German lines and raced across France. By July 2nd, some 1 million Allied troops had landed, 566,000 tons of supplies, and 171,000 vehicles. In Germany, Operation Valkyrie was a planned coup d'etat led by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg to assassinate Hitler. He survived the bomb blast, unfortunately, in an attempt on his life on July 20th. Von Stauffenberg and some generals were executed. Rommel was also implicated in the plot, but was allowed to take his own life. Paris was liberated by the Allies on August 25th. Southern France was liberated by the advancing Allies by August 28th. Germany was now in full retreat to their borders. Luxembourg was liberated from the Nazis on September 11th. Collaborators and women who slept with the German soldiers, as you see on the bottom right, would have their hair shaved and swastikas put on the foreheads. Male collaborators were just shot. Operation Market Garden was the largest airborne operation. Montgomery had a plan to end the war by Christmas. Elements of 3 airborne divisions, over 1,500 planes, and 500 gliders would drop elements of these divisions into Holland in an attempt to capture the corridor leading from Eindhoven to Arnhem that crosses the 5 water bodies, including 2 major river bridges on the Rhine River. The initial landings were a great success. 2 of the bridges were captured intact. The bridge at Somme was destroyed before it was secured. The major river bridges over the Wall at Nijmegen and the Rhine at Arnhem were not secured. However, one British battalion was able to establish perimeter on the north side of the Arnhem Bridge. But bad intelligence hurt the operation. Unknown to the Allies, the British dropped into the 9th SS and 10th SS Panzer divisions. The German divisions were resting, refitting, and therefore under strength, but their presence would create havoc in the next week. The airborne assault was in conjunction with an armor drive by the British 30th Corps, spearheaded by Guards Armored Division. They ran into very determined and unexpected resistance, advancing only 7 miles on the first day. Operation Market Garden continues as a fog prevents reinforcement airdrops at Arnhem until in the late afternoon, German forces launched strong attacks against the British positions at Arnhem. Attempts to reinforce the battalion in the town and the bridges proved fruitless. The 30th Corps was able to advance 20 miles, relieving the 101st Airborne, but was forced to stop to repair the bridge at Sons. Elements of the 82nd Airborne engaged the heavy street fighting in Nijmegen as they moved into the bridge there. By September 22nd, 30th Corps was unable to advance to within 6 miles of Arnhem, but no further. 2 days later, the operation is called off, and Operation Market Garden was in total shambles.
Return to the Philippines. Admiral Chester Nimitz took the vital islands of Saipan and the Marianas Island chain. Saipan was close enough to Japan that B-29 bombers could be used to reach it without risking fuel shortages. The next stop was to retake the Philippines to fulfill the vow by General Douglas MacArthur. The battle to retake the Philippines began on June 19, 1944, with the Battle of the Philippine Sea, fought entirely with carrier-based aircraft, resulting in the loss of the United States of 50 planes, with 72 more crashing, while Japan lost 500 planes and 3 carriers. On July 18, 1944, Premier Tojo resigned as the head of the Japanese government. The Army landed on October 20, 1944. Japan, realizing the importance of the raw materials there to its war effort, launched an attack. The landing on Leyte by the U.S. Sixth Army, supported by naval and air bombardment, landed on the favorable eastern shore of Leyte. The Battle of Leyte Gulf occurred during October 23rd through the 26th, the largest naval battle of the war. 3 separate engagements was a decisive Japanese defeat. They lost 24 ships, including 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers. The offensive capacity of the Japanese fleet was destroyed. The Japanese introduced the kamikaze, or divine wind. Young Japanese pilots would purposely crash their planes loaded with fuel and bombs into U.S. warships. Why suicide? Japan had very few experienced pilots. The majority of pilots were shot down and killed. So it's thought, if you're going to die, you might as well take out a carrier or a battleship. Unfortunately, this adds to the belief that Japanese would rather die than surrender.
The election in 1944. In the 1944 election, the Republicans nominated Thomas Dewey. Henry Wallace was replaced as FDR's running mate with Senator Harry Truman of Missouri. The leaders of the Democratic Party knew FDR was gravely ill, and he would probably not make it through his 4th term, so they needed a very strong person as his vice president. The campaign was very simple. You do not change horses at midstream. FDR easily would win his party's nomination and the presidency with an electoral vote of 432 to 99. The popular vote was much closer, 53% of the popular vote to 46% of the popular vote for Dewey. The air war in Europe. The strategy. Bombing of Germany was a consistent event. Americans bombed during the day when the missions had greater accuracy but were more dangerous. The British bombed at night when it was safer. This was not thought of as the British failing to pull their own weight, but as a right earned since they had been involved from the start. The workhorse of the 8th Army Air Corps for the United States was the B-17 Flying Fortress. It could actually fly based on one engine. It was called the Flying Fortress due to the number of machine guns that could protect from every area on the plane, and they would always fly in box formation. This would become an important turning point in the bombing raids in Germany occurred when P-51 Mustangs, pictured in the left corner, could begin successfully escort American bombers deep into Germany and relative safely. Despite of the bombing campaigns like the fire bombings in Dresden, which you see in the picture right-hand corner, tens of thousands of German civilians were killed. It does not break the spirit of the German people. In 4 raids between 13 February and 15 February of 1945, 1,300 heavy bombers of the British Royal Air Force and the British in the United States Army Air Corps would drop more than 3,900 tons of high explosive bombs and incendiary devices on the city of Dresden. The resulting firestorm destroyed 15 square miles of the city center and caused thousands of civilian casualties. The bomb raids in Germany, the Allies conducted on factories, began to cripple the German economy. The Battle of the Bulge, December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945, took place during frigid weather conditions, with some 30 German divisions attacking battle-fatigued American troops across 85 miles of the densely wooded Ardennes forest from December 16 to January 25th. It would be Germany's last mounted major offensive. 130 English-speaking Germans were infiltrated into the American lines in 30 captured American jeeps. They rerouted road signs, told cock and bull stories of a planned assassination of Ike in Paris. NCOs were able to stop everyone in asking questions that only an American soldier would really know, such as, who is Mickey's girlfriend? Where does little Abner live? And Dogpatch. Who are the bums? Which were the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Malmedy Massacre was a war crime committed by the German Waffen SS unit led by Joachim Peiper near Malmedy, Belgium on December 17. 84 American prisoners of war were shot. 43 would end up surviving. The American 101st Airborne Division, led by Brigadier General G.C. McAuliffe, was surrounded in Bastogne. When asked to surrender on December 21st, McAuliffe replied, nuts! This had to be explained to the German commander. Patton's Third Army would break through the lines and relieve the battling bastards of Bastogne, as they were called by the American press, on December 26. On December 30th, American forces regrouped to slow the German advance, and by the end of January, the German offensive was finally halted. The Americans would suffer 19,000 American soldiers killed in action, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 plus missing. It was the bloodiest battle for the Americans in the European theater. About 100,000 Germans were killed, wounded, or captured.